If you've ever wanted to get some advice and some tips on how to come into a law firm feeling empowered, how to use your superpowers, how to take responsibility for your practice, this episode is for you. I got to spend some time with Megan McAllister, who is both a coach and a consultant. She's been in this space in law working for many, many years. She's worked in big law. She's worked in large law. And for the last 5.5 years or so, she's been working in a consulting practice, working with leadership of firms, working with culture issues, working with juniors and everything in between, everybody in between. And she's going to talk about empowerment and leaning into your role and what you can do to take responsibility for your own practice. And she is highly credible. She's very generous, and I'm really looking forward to interviewing her. She's a great person, and I think she would be an amazing coach for anybody who is inclined to get their own coach to ensure their success. So let's have a listen to Megan and see what she'll share. Enjoy. Welcome to the Lawyer Launcher Podcast. Hello, friends. I'm your host, Susan Van Dyke. If you're a law student or a new lawyer eager to launch a successful career, you're in the right place. Drawing on more than 25 years of experience, I'll demystify the business of law and help you understand just what it takes to succeed. We'll empower you, help build confidence, and reduce anxiety. Our experts will share tips and advice, and I can't wait for you to hear from them. Now, let's dive in. Megan McAllister, thank you so much, and welcome to the Lawyer Launcher Behind the Bar podcast. It's really great to have you here. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's going to be a juicy conversation. I know you have a lot of stuff to share, and I know you have a ton of experience. And as I was just saying to you, I love sort of digging into these topics. And I feel very lucky to have people like you who I get to talk with and kind of nerd out with a little bit, if I can put it that way, and just indulge in our passions for helping all kinds of lawyers in all kinds of spaces in law. My own passion, and I think you share this too, is the opportunity for a student to cross that threshold to their first law firm and be as prepared, have those truths, really know what they're going into, develop some skills, some self-awareness, some empowerment, which is a space I know you have a lot to share on, can set somebody up for their future hardly like anything else. Would you agree?
Yes. I mean, I think it's such a huge point of growth for a student when they're entering into those first stages of their career, and to have tools, to have empowerment, to feel good about that shift
Yes.
It's really valuable, all of the conversations that you're bringing to students.
Oh, good. And I think, we talk a lot about emotional intelligence, and I want to get a little bit more granular about what is emotional intelligence. Why is it so important? You learn the skills in law school. You learn how to think, you learn your technical skills and so forth. But when you bring that into a law firm, it's just so different. Mm-hmm. It's so very different. The environment is different. There's no structure, really. There's just so much different about it. And we're dropping these grads into an environment that I feel strongly we haven't really prepared them for. Mm-hmm. And emotional intelligence is one of those nebulous topics for some people that is hard to kind of get a grasp on. So, what are your thoughts on, give me some framework on what you've seen, maybe on the junior years? I know you work with everybody, right? Mm-hmm. You work with senior people and all that, but we're going to just focus on the student and junior level. What have you seen on emotional intelligence? Anything there you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the way that I think about this, when you're entering into a law firm environment, your school smarts are sort of the table stakes, right? That's an expectation that you're bringing certain skill sets and certain knowledge to the table that law school has prepared you for. And then the shift becomes around the emotional intelligence. And I've heard this talked about as soft skills, and I dispute that characterization. I think that these are sort of power skills that can really differentiate people and set them apart. And I also think that emotional intelligence is maybe simplified a little bit and thought about in terms of, emotional intelligence at a very obvious level is like, do you get along with others? But I think that there's a lot more depth to it if we really want to sort of exercise emotional intelligence as a true power skill. So when I think about emotional intelligence, I'm thinking about somebody that is thinking about how they build trust within the organization, thinking about your interactions with others, what's the ratio of sort of positive interactions versus interactions that might not be so positive? And are we thinking about things in those terms? All the different touch points, all the different opportunities that we have to make an impression, whether it's our work product or just the way that we show up in a meeting with a partner or an associate, at a event that is hosted by a firm. So being mindful of the way that we present, both in terms of our work product, but also in terms of who we are and the way that we show up. I think emotional intelligence is also about how we show up, how we manage ourselves in less than perfect conditions. So when we are feeling stressed out, when things are not going as well as they should, how are we able to manage that? Are we able to catch ourselves in those moments of stress and sort of self-regulate and adapt and notice what's going on? And in a similar way, in our interactions with others, it's really easy to have emotional intelligence when we see things exactly the same way, when we have the exact same communication styles or work delivery styles. Those skills really get tested when we have to work with people that are different, or we have different ideas about how to approach a task or a project, or we're noticing different communication styles. So that's what I think about emotional intelligence. I think, on a very surface level, we can think about it in terms of how we interact with others. But really, it really gets tested, shown, displayed in less than ideal circumstances.
And we both know that law can be very stressful.
Yeah.
In all areas of law, it can be very stressful. And I think that's where those disciplines get stressed. Mm-hmm. And I was writing down some notes as you were talking, because I loved everything that you just said. Mm-hmm. And I love the reframing of it being a power skill, mm-hmm. that it's not just a soft skill, but it is actually, it's a differentiator in my opinion. And I think, and you can probably do this too, Megan, when you think about the people that you work with, those that are the most successful, and mm-hmm. success is defined differently from other people, but in a classical sense of success, they attract work, they keep clients, they're making good compensation, et cetera. Most of them, I'm going to say probably 80 to 90% of them have high EQ, high emotional intelligence. And the other thing I loved what you said is around self-awareness, being aware of when maybe you are not showing up in the way that you intend to, that you're under stress and you need to take a beat before you respond or what have you. And the stress can't be, I don't think it can be emphasized enough, whether it's internal stress that you're experiencing in a file with opposing counsel with your client, or you're subjected to the stress of others. The partner you're working with on a file is feeling stress. You may not actually feel the stress in that moment, but somebody comes charging into your workspace, their hair's on fire, and you think, holy crap, your internal alarms are going off, and now so I just want to acknowledge that it's not an easy thing to develop, that some people make it look easy. I think the leaders that you and I get to work with, some of them make it look easy. Some need help and some need more skills. Mm-hmm. Some that I've worked with, and rainmakers and people who are successful, some of them make it look really easy. But I know, and you probably know, Megan, because you work with them, they've trained themselves. They've worked at it, right? So would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with it. I mean, it's a high pressure, high performance profession, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the developing the internal skills and the practices to be able to manage ourselves and ground ourselves and show up at our best and have compassion for ourselves when we don't show up at our best. Yes. All of that is
I love that. Yes.
That's a whole other conversation, I think, in and of itself, but it is embedded into this sort of power skill of emotional intelligence. And it's absolutely necessary when you're in a profession that has these sorts of pressures and stressors on yourself, or as you said, coming from other people as well.
Yeah. So you've worked in big law. You've mm-hmm. worked in large law. You mm-hmm. now, as a consultant for the last 5+ years, have worked probably with a whole bunch of characters across a whole bunch of types of firms and practice areas. And I use the word characters intentionally. What do you see on a day-to-day basis? Are there any specific things you can think of that would help somebody dial into improving their emotional intelligence, and examples and specifics? Like, can you put us into a day-to-day setting where somebody could actually apply some skills?
Yeah. Let me try, and tell me if I'm being too general, and tell me if I can break it down into more specifics. I mean, one One sort of sub-competency of emotional intelligence that I think about a lot is the idea of empathy. And I think empathy can also really be viewed as a soft skill. But if we think about empathy as putting ourselves in the shoes of other people, and if we think about that within the student context, that may be a student feeling like maybe they're not getting all of the feedback that they would like to get. They feel like their mentor doesn't have the time for them or isn't giving them as much feedback as they'd like. And the empathetic approach to that would be what might be going on for this other person. And if they put themselves in the shoes of that person, they might understand that they're dealing with a partner that's pulled in a million different directions, who is struggling to get everything done, who would really love to provide feedback, but really has zero time in order to be able to offer it. And with that empathetic position, then we might in turn think about what are the things that we could do to make it easier on that partner to give us that feedback, right? How can we operate? And I talk a lot about this from a state of sort of agency in terms of, hey, how can I influence this relationship or make it easier for this person to give me this feedback? So that's sort of one example that immediately comes to mind. But this topic of empathy and putting ourselves in the shoes of others, both in terms of getting what we want or what we need from that relationship, but also in terms of how we might make that person's life easier, I think is always going to be a winning strategy, no matter where you're at in your career.
So the two things I just wrote down that you said, which I thought were brilliant, which is so probably the most empowering thing I've heard, is somebody to ask themselves, how can I influence this relationship? Mm-hmm. And I want to answer that question, the two of us, for any students or juniors who are listening. And the second thing you said that I think is also as important is, how can I make life easier for the lawyer I'm working with? And this is translatable, by the way, to clients, everything you're saying. I just want to just note that we're not focused on that in this discussion, but it translates beautifully if we have somebody who's more senior listening to this. So when we talk about how can I influence this relationship, do they ask? Are they forthcoming? I mean, that takes a bit of nerve for a student, a junior associate to ask. So they need to probably get comfortable with language that feels more safer and more authentic to them.
Yeah.
So what could they say about that? How do they step into that? Because I love that question.
Yeah. So I think about this as the idea or the competency of like being coachable. So there's a few different ways that we could sort of think about this. So if we convey through our actions and our words to someone that I deeply care about doing a good job for you, and I'm going to do my part in this relationship, we're going to greatly increase the likelihood that that person's going to be invested in our success, right?
Yes.
By communicating that through our energy, through our actions, through our words, through our behaviors. So there could be language that we could use the first time that we're working with someone. We could say, hey, it's my first time working with you, or this is the first time that I've taken on this task. I really care about giving you a work product that's going to add value. Is there anything I need to know about working with you? Could you give me a sense of what the work product should look like at the end of the project? Are you expecting me to check in along the way of the project, or would you like me to deliver as near of a final of a draft as possible? So we can take it upon ourselves to sort of proactively clarify expectations with some questions, recognizing that we're going to make it a lot easier for that person to give us direct feedback that we need in order to enable the degree to which we deliver the work product that they're looking for. We're also going to convey that we really care through asking those questions. And something that feels like a secret that maybe should be revealed in law firm environments, but I think all work environments, is much of the constructive critique or feedback that people get, it actually is less of a right or wrong. And most of the time, it has more to do with preferences. And many people have preferred ways of working or expectations around work product that maybe they think are obvious to other people, but aren't. So if we can take the position of agency and almost manage up in terms of the way that we're asking questions, we're doing two things. Again, we're setting ourselves up for success, and we're sending a really powerful message that we care about adding value.
Oh, Megan, 100%. And there may be an assumption that students believe that the way instructions are delivered is just the way it's delivered. But actually what you're saying, and I know this to be true too, managing up, meaning you're the junior, you're managing somebody senior to you, you're managing them to give you instructions and to lay out exactly how they like things. Because I think most senior people know that this person likes their drafting done this way. This person likes it that way. We're a bit idiosyncratic in the way that we like our work. And I've sat in meetings with partners at the boardroom table talking about a student, a junior, a mid-level associate, and there can be very different experiences with different partners, right? You're nodding, different partners as well. And they look at each other like aliens and they go, what? They're fantastic. What do you mean? Oh no, they did way too much research on something. Yeah, but that's their superpower. And they did that for me. They go off and they explain how they really suited their style, but they may not have suited another partner's style of work. And what you're saying, which I think is brilliant, and I love the way you call it a secret, is to actually ask them, lay it out. And you might even say as a student, I know different lawyers, or I believe different lawyers like to work in slightly different ways. And it's important to me that I deliver in a way that works for you. So I would love to know, et cetera, what the deliverable should be. I think that kind of clarity, if a student had that kind of clarity, honestly, Megan, I think that could be an utter game changer.
I think so too. I can feel both of us getting excited about this.
Provided you, but here's the key though, provided you deliver as best you can on what you heard is needed. So you ask the question, always take a notebook into the office or on the Zoom call or however you're meeting, and do your best to deliver. Follow those instructions. Don't think you know better. Follow the instructions of the lawyer.
Yeah, 100%. If when people are taking the time to give us really explicit instructions or feedback, we can choose to think of that as like a gift of setting ourselves up for success. And we can recognize that not everyone will do that. So if someone is taking the time to give us clear and explicit instructions or feedback, we really want to show that we're paying attention. So I think, listening deeply, right, for what this explicit instruction is, but also maybe listening under the surface for some of the values that are important to that partner, noting it down. You're probably, if you're keeping notes about different partners' preferences, you're going to want to save it in a confidential place, right? You don't want anyone coming across that. But having a system for tracking all of that, I still do that in my work with clients. I note down the preferences that I pick up on. Sure. And I keep sort of an inventory of what all of that is. That's a huge piece of it, is that follow through. If they're giving you the gift of that clarity and that feedback, showing that you're following through on it.
And would you say, just to tie up this topic, would you agree, as you're sitting, I always think of it in a physical space, because that's where I grew up in law, is in a physical space with partners, tying up that conversation with, okay, if I understood you correctly, I am to spend 4 hours on this memo, do 2 hours of research, draft it with bullet points, check in with you tomorrow afternoon, and then deliver the final draft to you by Friday at 4 or whatever. Right? Yeah. Like to tie it all up, because they might go, oh, wait a second. No, actually. And they might make a correction to their instructions. And then you have that's just such clarity that process alone, I think would be super impressive.
Yeah, I agree. And as we're talking about it, it feels that there's the practicality of doing that in terms of catching everything and making sure that you've caught the instruction. And it's also the signal of caring. And that really sends an important message.
An important message, and it builds trust, right? When you deliver as best you can on the instructions and not second guess the instructions, that builds trust. Why is trust important? Because people keep bringing you work. You want to be busy. You want those senior associates and those lawyers, mid-level associates too, to continue to count on you and send you work. I think that's so important. You talk a lot about taking ownership of your development, Megan. You really believe in kind of stepping into the responsibility of taking on your career and whatnot. What does that look like concretely for, let's just use a summer and articling student, because I know many of them are now looking ahead, a few months ahead to their summer articling, or in the US, an internship. What are your thoughts on what somebody can do in a concrete kind of manner to take responsibility for themselves in that space?
Yeah. I've got some ideas, and this comes from, I'm also a certified leadership coach, and so much of coaching is about being responsible for what we can do in any given situation, right? And really looking at our zone of control. So big passion of mine to talk about this sort of thing. A few ideas. So one, I'm going to group this into what I would call like creating your own. We can call it creating your own development plan. We could call it creating your own success plan. Put whatever terminology you want
Love
on
it.
it, but
Yeah.
it's thinking about the things that we can do to influence our chances of success and learning. Um, One, I would probably be creating a list of specific experiences that I would want to have during that summer or articling term. So that could be tasks, projects, people that I want exposure to, but I'm creating some sort of list so that I have some sort of internal metrics that can guide my development. Now, maybe I do or maybe I don't get to tackle all of that in my summer term or in my articling term, because maybe not all of that is within my control. But at least I've created a little bit of an internal mapping or framework that I can keep sort of checking in on along the way. And that if I'm having conversations with people that are able to influence the work that I'm able to get, that I'm able to say, hey, these are some of the things that I was hoping to do. These are some of the things that I'm interested in. So I'd have that sort of task or project plan for myself. I feel like you might want to build
I
on
am
that.
so excited about what you're talking about. I'm thinking of it as a wish list. And I love the
Mm-hmm.
idea of a student coming in and actually sharing that list and saying, whatever we can do to knock off this wish list. And I know I may not get all of my items checked off, but if there's anybody who can help me, I mean, it'd be so impressive for a student at the end of whatever period to say, oh my gosh, I actually worked through my entire list and then share it with
Yeah.
others within the firm would be, I think, incredibly empowering. So I love that. Please
Yeah.
carry on. I love that.
Yeah.
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 Okay. So we're
And
creating a wish list. Yep.
we're creating a wish list, which is something, frankly, we can continue doing in our career, right? As
Yes.
we hit off
Yeah.
different benchmarks and then we think about what we want to do next in terms of, again, taking control of our own development. So, yeah, the task or project or exposure list, it would be point number one. Point number two would be what I would call some sort of like reflection practice. And I look at this through two angles. One, where am I growing and developing, and what are some of the wins that I have? And the other is my key lessons. So the wins, why it's important to capture this is because many of us need to remind ourselves of all the positive things that we have learned and the ways that we have grown and developed, because as humans, we have a negativity bias. And especially if we are in a period of steep learning, we might find that we're making mistakes and things aren't going our way. So it can be really important to positively reinforce all of the things that we're able to do today that we weren't able to do yesterday, right? So some people call this, a wins list, a kudos list, whatever you want to call it, but some sort of tracking mechanism around here's all of the areas that I'm developing in. And then related to that would be my lessons. What are some of the things that I have learned that I would do differently? And doing this again with a really compassionate and growth mindset lens, not from the perspective of beating ourselves up about where we went wrong, but more from the perspective of like, hey, I'm a imperfect human being in a learning curve. And on any given day and on any given week, I'm probably going to learn some things and have some refinements to the way that I work that are important to capture. This could be something substantive, like I was given a research task and I approached it too narrowly and I needed to be a lot more broad about it. Or it could be I showed up on a video call and I didn't test my video
Yes.
equipment and I didn't make the best impression at the start of
Yeah.
that call, right? So I still keep a list like this for myself and I look at it weekly, probably 15 minutes on Friday. And it's a quick little one column for my wins and one column for my lessons. And then from time to time, I go back and I note it up and I reflect on it. And it's affirming in terms of all the ways that I'm growing. And it also sort of keeps me accountable to what some of my learning and growth edges are. So that would be sort of my second sort of tangible suggestion. The I'll pause there in case, because I have a couple more, Susan, but I want to give pause if you want to jump in
I
on that.
just quickly want to, I love
Yeah.
this as well. And what came to mind for me is two things. One, it can be quick to do, because a student listening might think, oh, for the love of God, I've got to now do something more, right? But it can be as quick as you're on transit going home, or you're walking to your car, and you could just dictate into a private notes on your phone. It can be messy. It doesn't need to be on a beautiful spreadsheet that's all color coded. It can be, or on a sticky note, like a, analog method, whatever. Just do it, because what I'm loving that you still, Megan, you've got umpteen years of experience and you're still doing it. I do it in a different fashion as well. I love the idea of where's my growth opportunity. And I love the idea of going back and seeing where you've actually grown. You think, oh, I don't do that anymore. That's fantastic. I don't really need that reminder, because I now have the muscle memory and I've worked myself through that issue, and I don't do that anymore. So I can almost cross that off my list, because it's not a current thing that I'm working on. And to know that you've made progress and growth can be very empowering.
Yeah, it's actually quite motivational. As humans, we kind of need to know and have practices to reinforce where we're learning and growing, because of that human negativity bias that we can have. So it can be, it can be really important in terms of our motivation. And I know many senior people that have similar practices. It looks different for everyone, how frequently we do it, how much time we spend on it, to your point, whether it's in a spreadsheet or on a piece of paper. But if we want to show up with excellence, we're probably going to have some sort of practice around growth and learning and keeping ourselves accountable to that.
Yes. I want to keep going, but let me insert this really quickly. And I've talked about this on other interviews and in other forums. Growth is uncomfortable. So don't shy away from the discomfort that represents growth. Discomfort means you're okay, lean in, you don't need to be perfect, et cetera, et cetera. So I've talked about this a lot in other podcasts, but I want to note it here because it's important not to avoid it.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And the lens that I try to bring to it myself, and if I was coaching people on this sort of thing, would be the compassionate lens, right? It's not tracking the lesson for the sake of beating ourselves up. It's tracking the lesson in service of, okay, so that happened. Is there something that I can learn from that in terms of how do I move forward?
Because then it feels productive, right?
Then it feels productive.
Then it feels productive. Okay, so we've got the reflection practice. So number one was list your experiences and the exposure that you want. Number two was the reflection practice. Are we on to number three?
Yeah. I'm going to say it's either number three or it's a sub of number two.
Okay.
And that is self-assessing ourselves. So anytime, if you are a summer student or an articling student, especially early in your career, you're going to have a lot of firsts that you're doing. So self-assessing yourself on the task at hand, and we can ask ourselves two simple questions. What went well? What would I do differently next time? Again, that's reinforcing that growth mechanism. And the other thing that it's doing is it's giving us another mechanism for feedback that's not dependent on someone else offering it to us. So I'd love to say, in people's early career years, that they're getting lots of plentiful, clear feedback that is immediate and specific and objective. And the reality is that many people are busy in law firms. And also point number two is it's incredibly hard for people to give constructive feedback. Even senior people that you would think would not shy away from giving constructive feedback, it's actually really difficult. And I know that to be true because I coach a lot of senior people on giving feedback more regularly. It's tough. So something that we can do, again, to take our career into our own hands is to do what we can to reflect on feedback. So if we get a document back and it is redlined all over the place, we might look at that and we might try to notice what are some of the patterns, like what is emerging in terms of the red lines, what did we miss? And we can do our own sort of self-learning on the tasks. So having your own practice for doing that feedback and almost giving yourself your own feedback is something that I'd really recommend. And maybe it falls into that reflection practice.
And I want to share a story as well. I was at a business event just very recently, and I was speaking with a woman at the table that I was at, and she asked me what I do for a living. And aside from my consulting practice, I talked about Lawyer Launcher. She said, what's Lawyer Launcher about? One of the things I mentioned within the Lawyer Launcher framework was how lawyers give feedback, how that feedback represents growth and opportunity for somebody new in their career. Well, she is a surgeon. So if we just stop and think about it, she's somebody who's at by and large, the pinnacle of her career. She spent, decades at school or whatever, right? Like I'm exaggerating, but so many years in school. And she's like, yeah, I need to get better at that. I need to get better at giving feedback to those that I'm working with. So I would love some advice on that. So that was kind of interesting. So, I think we make assumptions that people who are really senior, really established, really smart are also going to be good at this, and they need help giving feedback too. But I love the idea of taking the responsibility of oneself, taking responsibility for that. I think that's really empowering.
Yeah. And maybe you made a point there that I feel an opportunity to build on around this feedback. It's really hard for people to give constructive feedback. And I think people would be really surprised by how hard it is for some senior people to give feedback. People think, oh, this senior partner, that should be easy for them. They're the senior partner at the firm. It's not. It can be really, really tricky. So one of the things that we can do to increase the likelihood that we're going to get feedback is some of what we've been talking about, giving the feedback to ourselves, clarifying expectations, but also falling into this coachable sort of mode of being is, how do you respond when people do give you constructive feedback, right? And I want to recognize here that it's like pretty normal if we feel a little defensive maybe when we get some constructive feedback. It's not easy. None of this is easy that I'm talking about. But if we want people to give us more constructive feedback, we really need to be good about managing our responses when we're offered constructive feedback. So if we're getting into defensive territory, or sort of coming up with excuses maybe for what happened, we're going to make that feedback experience feel bumpier for the person giving us feedback. So if we can learn to manage ourselves again, manage our response, listen for what the lesson is. Maybe we might need some clarity on the feedback, but maybe like giving ourselves a pause to like take in the feedback, think about what the lesson is, and then follow up when we're out of that kind of defensive zone. That can just really go a long way. So I say this coming from the experience of being in HR roles where I've needed to deliver feedback to people and they say, well, why didn't that person deliver it to me directly? And what I can see is the person shows up really defensively in a feedback situation. So I can see why they're not getting the feedback directly, because it can be quite tricky to deliver it to them. So yeah, I just felt like that was an appropriate addition at this point.
That is excellent, Megan. And I'll add to that is, I think, one of the characteristics that partners in a firm would look for is how coachable a student or junior associate is. And you've just nailed it. And I think that one of the best responses, and we can build muscle memory around this, one of the best responses to receiving any kind of feedback is thank you for sharing. Whether you agree with it or not, or you understand it, the initial response, in my view, should be thank you so much for sharing. Why? Because we believe and know that it's probably difficult for that person to give us that feedback. So we want to acknowledge them. That's an emotional intelligence practice right there. Thank you for the feedback. Perfectly fine to say, can I go and think about that? Can I go away? You've given me a lot to think about and I want to process that. Is there anything else I need to know? Right? You don't have to respond fully to feedback in that moment. And a lot of lawyers are introverts, as we know. And so they need processing time. They need to go away and really think about, not to build your defense, not to make excuses, but I had a really good piece of advice from a chief marketing officer many years ago, Julian Ward. I'll call her out because she's wonderful. She said, we have to get into the practice of de-emotionalizing communication, because sometimes communication is delivered with a lot of heightened emotion. And what we hear as the recipient is the emotion. And we miss that nugget of truth. And I've used that tool my whole career to de-emotionalize a message so I don't miss the message. So I need a beat. I want to take a minute.
Yeah.
And I want to process that and recover if I need to recover. Everybody sometimes needs to recover if it's really hard feedback. But then look for, okay, what's my lesson in that? I don't want to lose it because somebody's gone to the effort to share that with me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a full connect back to the
Yeah.
emotional intelligence and what we talked about
Yes.
around the
Yes.
self-regulation, particularly in the stressful moments. And
Yes.
yeah, I think what we're talking, I mean, we're talking about buying some time to decide how we want to respond to the feedback,
Exactly.
right?
And
And
that's
managing our
totally
response in
fair.
the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Megan. That's totally fair.
Really.
But I think to show some grace, some maturity, some professionalism in that moment, and then allow yourself a minute. Say, I'll come back to you tomorrow. Let me process. I'll come back to you tomorrow and can we talk more about it? Which takes some courage. I'm not going to lie. I mean, that really takes some courage. But I think to give yourself some grace and buy yourself some time to give it a think, have a
Yeah.
look at your documents, have a look at, revisit what you did
Yeah.
and then own it. And the best, I've said, I've led teams as well. And I've always said the best way to take the sting out of an issue or a complaint is to just quickly own it and apologize. If you really, misstepped, to say, oh my gosh, you're right. That was regrettable. I wish I thought about behaving or responding to something differently. And I apologize. Let me go away and think about that. As soon as you apologize and own it,
Mm-hmm.
it takes a lot of the fight out of somebody who's come to you mad, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I hear the word accountability come up a lot in terms of the sort of qualities that are really valued in a law firm, and I think it's important because mistakes will happen, right? So the question is it easy for people to raise things with you? How do you learn from it? How do you respond to it?
Yeah, 100%. Are we finished with your list? Because I wanted to move in a slightly different direction, but I don't want to rush you.
I have one more that
Let's hit it.
that I hope could be valuable. So I'll throw it at you, and that's this idea of I call it like a internal board of directors. So a group of people that can mentor and influence you within your career. And I tend to think about it as looking for a really diverse board in terms of what you admire about different people. So there might be someone that you admire in terms of how they manage their career from a work-life balance perspective. There could be someone that you admire at the firm that's a junior associate that seems to get really great work and work with a lot of the different partners, and you really want to pay attention to what they're doing to navigate those relationships. There might be someone that you really admire the way that they show up in a meeting or how they do public speaking. So this personal board of directors or mentors, they might know that they are mentors to you. You might actually approach them and say, hey, I really admire the way you seem to do this in your career. How do you do that? I'd love to learn from you. By the way, people love talking about themselves. So generally, when you approach people with those sorts of questions and affirm and acknowledge them for something that you admire about them, generally, they're probably going to be pretty open to sharing with you. So it could be sort of a direct mentorship relationship in that way. Or it could be a little bit covert. I'm thinking back to mentors that I had in my career, where I'm thinking to a former managing partner where I really admired their public speaking skills and the way that they could hold a room. And I don't think that they knew that they were my mentor, but every time I saw them doing public speaking and holding a room, I was paying attention and I was like taking notes about what they did. So if we can develop these people that we admire for whether it's the technical qualities, whether it's the relationship building, or whether it's their sense of leadership or the way that they manage their career and their life, I think that can be really, really helpful and empowering to us. We can take little bits from different people versus presuming that the mentor that gets assigned to us is the one and only person that we need to learn from.
And isn't that a myth that we should only ever have one mentor? I believe in many. And I love the framework of a board of directors. And I love the idea of being really intentional and using your observation skills to look across the field to see who you admire and who you would like to mimic, right? Who, like, I'd like to show up like that. I'd like to show up in a boardroom and, be the most articulate in the room, or be the person who's the best prepared, whatever, right? I think that's great advice. I love that. And I love, and you can have covert or very intentional mentors. And I've had mentors my whole career. And I think a lot of people that have seen any success will say it's hard to be successful without one.
Yeah. There's some bits and pieces that we can pull from different people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you could create a human, I've said that in recruitment sometimes. If I could create a candidate, I would take this piece from this person, this piece, and I would create this this perfect human that obviously doesn't exist. So we're kind of talking about the same thing, borrowing, attributes from others.
Yeah.
Let me change horses here for a sec. And I want to talk about the competitive environment that students find themselves in. And, we're at a time of year where there's interviews going on and, there's OCIs at different times and different things where people are feeling really very competitive. And I know when I talk to students, they're thinking about, they're probably not sharing the advice I'm giving them, unless it's on this podcast. They're probably keeping some things to themselves. They're feeling very competitive. And I get that because we are in a competitive environment, and law, attracting work is competitive. And I've certainly worked in business development, and I know that, good work is competitive. What are some common things? What would you suggest to a student that they could tip the scales in their favor in a competitive environment? Is there anything that comes to mind? If you have two equally capable students, I think a lot of it comes down to kind of personality and fit, which is hard to create because you want to show up as your authentic self. But is there anything that you would say about that? If you have two equally, marks are around the same, undergrad might be around the same. Is there anything that they can do to tip the scales?
Yeah, a lot of it is what we talked about today. The first thing that comes to mind is be coachable, right? It's part of it is how you do the work and doing good work. The other is the experience of working with you, right?
Right.
So much of what we talked about today is like the soft skills, not actually being the soft skills, being the power skills, being the things that set you apart, being the one that that people can trust when things are difficult, being the one who is adaptable and shows a growth mindset. I think all of those are the differentiating factors. And I say that with a whole lot of compassion for the reality that sometimes there's only one position available at a firm or two positions available at a firm. And it just comes down to that, right? And a firm just has constraints and they just have to choose. And that doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. And there may not be anything you can do to tip the scales because it's just a real constraint issue. You touched on something that's so tricky about this point in someone's career, right? I'm offering my response from the perspective of do everything you can to be coachable. And there's a certain reality here of there only being so many positions available, and getting into that what's next. If there's not a position available at the firm, okay, then how do you set yourself up for what the next steps in your career are going to be, and getting into agency around that mode versus what did I do wrong or what could I have done differently?
Right. I think there's also an opportunity to showcase your communication skills in interviews and showcase that you are coachable and talk about that, right?
Yeah. That's a great way to pull some of what we talked about today into the how do we move forward?
Yeah. And it could even be, I listened to the Lawyer Launcher podcast and I heard Megan talking about XYZ. No, really, I think to do research and to be aware of how firms want you to show up and what's going to make your career successful. I think doing that homework and bringing that forward, I think would be fantastic. Be fantastic. Megan, what haven't I asked you that I should ask you? What in the final moments that we have, is there anything left that we've covered so much ground and I loved our conversation. I want to make sure that we're not leaving anything critical behind.
That is such a coaching question that you're asking a coach and you're leaving me stumped with this.
Well, we covered a lot of ground. So maybe when you're thinking on the top of your head, we covered what we needed to. And I love all the lessons. You kind of took us through a journey and we covered a lot of different pieces, and you coached us kind of along the way with maybe not realizing you were coaching us. And I love the specifics and the language that you gave. And I hear that from students a lot. They need the language. They want to know what to say. It's easy for you and I to say, just figure out, this and that. Okay, that makes sense. But how do I do that? How do I actually lean in and do that? So to give them scripts, give them frameworks, I think is really helpful.
Good. I'm glad.
It's really, really helpful.
And you asked a lot of wonderful questions. And I guess if I could think about maybe a last sort of piece of advice that I would offer is this time in your career can be so filled with so many pressure, so much of a sense of pressure, I would say. And easy for people to say, but there's a zooming out that we can do and recognizing that this is one piece of a much longer and broader and bigger career. And there's so many ways to have a successful practice, and what might feel really make or break right now is just a small piece in a much longer career journey that you're going to have. And you're going to have so many opportunities to put all of this stuff into practice and really find your way and find the place that you're going to land that's going to be a good fit for you. So just to try to keep that big picture in mind, recognizing it's probably hard to do.
And the skills that you're suggesting that they build are career-long skills. It's going to serve them well now, but they're going to be skills that are going to serve them so very well throughout their career.
I think so.
Yeah, Megan, thank you so much. You've just kind of squished all your years of experience in part into this 45 minutes or half an hour, however long this podcast ends up being. And I'm so grateful for you to share your gifts. And people can reach you by email. I know we're going to share your email, or excuse me, your LinkedIn and your website address. What is the best way to reach you? Through email on your website?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you coach juniors too, right? Not just the senior folks. You coach everybody, and you bring that. What's so magical about your experience is you bring that full 360-degree view of a firm, leadership, juniors, and everything in between to the benefit of juniors. So I think people can appreciate your coaching style, which is so beautiful on this podcast. So people should not hesitate to reach out to you, right? And I know you do lots of presentations to firms and whatnot, and I think you'd be amazing in that space. So reach out to Megan and get her working for your firm or individually as a coach. Go look at her website and anything she puts out on LinkedIn and in articles, because it's going to be time well spent. Megan, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Susan. You're doing a great thing in bringing this podcast to students. So thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Stay tuned for our Lawyer Launcher debrief. I hope you enjoyed listening to that podcast as much as I enjoyed listening and having a conversation with Megan. She's so passionate about what she does. She has so much value to share. I loved her success plan and the tips that she shared, the list of experiences and exposure that you want to get, the reflection practice, the self-assessment, and the internal board of directors. I thought she was brilliant in that space and providing some insight into each of those areas and why they're important to your self-development. And the whole conversation around feedback might be insightful to some people who believe that if you're a senior person, it's easy to give feedback. And I think that's a real myth, and how you can take responsibility to ensure that you get the feedback that you need, so that you're experiencing growth, so that you're signaling to your firm that you are highly coachable. These are high value tips. And I hope you just take them to heart and make them your own. And if you need some coaching, reach out to Megan. She's wonderful. She's on Pacific time. She's out of Vancouver, and you can see how effective she would be. And I know that there's a lot of firms that rely on her expertise. And she's just highly credible, and she's really seen a lot, having worked in big law and large law and everything in between. So thanks for joining us, and I'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again.